Hello, Donna. Welcome to the Hidden Wire podcast. Great to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Leigh. Awesome to be here.
I love your work, all about productivity.
Yes, it's kind of how I roll. It's my thing. It's my jam.
Your jam. Would you say productivity or would you say lifestyle? Because I've read a lot about your work and it certainly seems that it's about helping people use their time more effectively.
I would say if I was to sum me up, I would say I help people have space and capacity for what's important. And I help them identify the things that they can stop doing in order to make space for the stuff that they really want to do. And that's everything from, I just had it this morning, right? So I could have laid in bed this morning and scrolled social media or get up and go for a walk. And so removing some things to make space for other things is kind of what I like to help people do.
Yeah, I love it. I am guilty. I'm one of those people that love to be busy and
Mm.
it's a killer sometimes because I suddenly start to jam pack my schedule with all this stuff. And as I look back over the years, it sort of goes up and down. But I have this tendency to do a lot of the unnecessary, and then it takes me away from what's really important in life. What is your take on that today, in this day and age, overwhelm and burnout and people's schedules?
Yeah, so I kind of refer to it as red brick thinking. And
Really brick
it's
thinking.
related to this idea. I did this little experiment. I can kind of show you here. This little experiment. Can you see my little
Yeah.
bridge here? And you can see it's crooked. And most people, when I say, how would you fix this? So they've got a problem. How would you fix this? Their instinct is to grab a brick and stick it under here and say, yay, now it's even. And so I say to them, well, what would happen if you remove the red brick? You still get an even bridge, but you've taken something away. And so I'm all about, what are the things you could take out of your schedule? What could you stop doing? What are some things that don't make sense to do anymore? What are some things that if you stopped doing them now, your future self would thank you? And so this idea that if we let it, our calendars will always fill up, our inboxes will always be full. There is always something to do, right? Always something to do. And yet, I reckon if we stopped and thought about it for a bit, there's some things we could stop doing that would mean we could, take better care of ourselves, do projects that matter, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I know you work with a lot of organizations around productivity.
Mm.
But on an individual basis, obviously we've got work that needs to be done. We all have
Mm.
jobs of some sort, right?
Mm.
How do you try and identify balance to people in the workforce and trying them to see that, you can still have work and productivity whilst also having a life?
But the reason that I think it's so hard to even define what work-life balance is because it is so different depending on where you're at in your career, right?
Right.
And so for me, I won't say towards the end of my career, but I'm kind of moving into a different phase of my life right now. And so I measure my success by the amount of days I have off. Whereas I used to measure my success by the amount of work I was doing and how busy I was and how booked out I was.
Yeah.
And so if I was, giving any advice to younger folks, the way you work out your balance is you got to identify what's the most important thing to you. And funnily enough, I reckon younger generations get this better than some of us older generation folks in that they're very good at identifying the most important stuff. They
Right.
don't they don't often do ridiculous hours and push themselves ridiculously hard. They get a cop a bit of criticism around that from older generations, but I reckon they've got it. They've figured out that they work in order to have a life. They work for a living, if you wish. And so it is hard, but the key of it comes to, well, why do you even work in the first place? And so
Mm.
most people would say, oh, to provide for my family, to have a great life, to create choices, all that sort of stuff. And yet they don't have any of that.
Yeah.
Their kids hardly see them, or they're tired all the time, or they're traveling a heap of stuff, always. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, just remind yourself, what's it really about?
What's it really about? I often ask myself that question.
Mm.
Being a slight workaholic myself. Why do you think the younger generation have figured that out? What do you think that come from? Is it because we're all
Yeah.
connected socially?
Look, it could be because they've watched their parents just be, in many cases, not fully present, burnt out, made redundant a gazillion times. I mean, we've come through 4 decades of downsizing the people in organizations, but we continue to upsize the workload. So it could be a reaction to that. It could be, apart from COVID, the younger
Yeah.
generations haven't had a lot of lack in their world. And so this idea that you can have whatever you want whenever you want it is
Right.
fairly real for them. And it's not that they're not willing to work hard. I don't want to kind of do any of that, because I know my daughter's a perfect example of this. She has a job that is pretty much a 9 to 5, but she refers to it as a lazy girl job. She's not lazy, but she plays violin in the Geelong Symphony Orchestra. She's a musician. She likes being in that creative world. So she has a job that frees her up to be able to do that. And I don't know why necessarily, but I think this generation is just way better at that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess I look back at it and go, okay, well, I'm that older generation that has this idea of, working. And when I was younger, obviously my values have changed since, but certainly to set your lifestyle up so you can have income and financial success, so you can have a house and all that sort of stuff. And that's why I sort of went out into the workforce and worked my butt off, to get ahead. Do you think the young people have that same vision, or they just think, well, we're always going to have it and it doesn't matter?
I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know. And it could be that they'll ride the work. I don't know. And I don't want to be at
Yeah.
all
Yeah. Of
derogatory at all towards other generations, because I really
course.
admire their work ethic. I really admire their work ethic.
Yeah.
But maybe they don't need to, because we did. Although having said that, it's my daughter has her own house, or she's
Yeah.
got a mortgage and stuff like that. But she and her partner have followed the fairly traditional model.
Yeah.
So I would say it's not all. But I do think the question of enough is the one that I think they're very good at answering.
Hmm.
And I kind of feel like I'm a Gen X, I identify as Gen X. Our generation was very much around just more. Why not have more? Why not work harder and have more money in the bank and more super and more investment properties and more stuff? And there was like this just because we could.
Yeah.
Whereas I think this generation is really good at being around enough. And I actually think
That's interesting, isn't it?
contentment is underrated, and settling is underrated, because there's, we've just kind of been pursuing this relentless desire for more.
Yeah.
Yet we don't, what would happen if you had enough
You've had enough. And you reckon the
or
younger
made do
generation
with
are
what you had?
more have a stronger mindset in that sort of realm.
Mm,
That, this is enough and I'm content and
I
I don't
do.
need more. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I do. Mm.
See, I wouldn't have thought that personally.
But
When
look,
you're yeah.
it's always a risk to generalize,
Mm,
right? To make generalizations, particularly across generational stuff, because there's always variations around this. But yeah, it's certainly career wise, I'm seeing trends in they don't necessarily want big careers. They don't have the same level of ambition and aspiration to be in massive managerial roles,
yeah.
and so traditional business models around work hard and you'll get a promotion
Sort
is
of
just
moving
not going to
on.
work.
Yeah. I sort of feel that, but it might just be my mindset at my age right now that, I look at it and go, okay, what's really important to me? And it's balance and having time off and doing the things that I enjoy. Where it used to be work, work, work. But as I look out there in society, I sort of feel that society's picking up on that too. And I
Yeah.
think not just the younger generation, maybe the younger generation are causing that in us, but to actually look at, life and what it's all about. It's not all about work. There's much more
Yeah.
important things there.
And, I'm coaching a woman at the moment who's, look, I won't call it a midlife crisis, but it feels a bit like that,
Yeah.
who's saying, and she's a Gen Xer again. And it's like, I don't know what my identity is without my high flying job.
Hmm.
And so, who am I if I'm not in a super senior position, working really hard, traveling around the
That's
world,
interesting.
solving complex problems? So,
Yeah.
if I'm now slow and she's kind of winding down, and she's like, I don't really know then what I'm about. What do I do? And I don't hear that from the younger folks. Their identities are not attached their worth is not attached to their work or their job or their title. And I
Yes,
think that's an interesting shift as well,
it
which
is.
means that they can find more meaning beyond the job or the work, etc.
So how would you help? Because I can sort of relate to that really.
Mm.
Because my worth I feel is tied up in my job, and that's probably why I keep working so hard at it. But how would you help that lady in particular to change or shift her mindset as to
Yeah, well, what I do is we work with patterns. We look at the
yeah,
history and say, let's, rather than label it as your jobs or your work, what were the aspects of it that you really liked?
right,
And how much of that can we pull into what you do in the future? So it could be that she just loves working in team environments and loves leading projects. Okay, well, could we do some volunteer stuff? It could be that she's, maybe going to write a book, or it could be that she's going to, do stuff with her kids and her grandkids that she's never had time to do before. But it's
mm,
really identifying what lights her up,
yeah,
because it's never the job, it's never the title, it's usually the work and then the benefit associated with the work, like working in teams because I love hanging out with people, like
yeah,
leading projects because I like to see results in stuff. Okay, well, how can we now drag and drop that onto your future?
yeah. I often look at personal values as
Yeah,
around looking at my values
same.
and going, well, these are the things that, and they're the aspects that you're talking about. These are the things that I really love or thrive on, and how can I design my life around incorporating those into that? Is that how you'd approach someone? Like when we talk about finding what's important and then doing the work that matters to get you there, is that how you help people identify
um,
that?
Well, yes, you bang on about values. It's around. I try to get them to go to the good old Stephen Covey. Begin with the end in mind. In the end, what do you want this next phase? I'm reluctant to use the word retirement because I don't think there's such a thing. It's kind of the next phase of life. What do you want this to
Yeah,
be? And I think in terms of 10-year decades, which to young people sounds like forever. But for me, I've always worked in, and I'm halfway through this current decade. What do I want this decade to be about? And then when I get to that one, then it's like, what's the next decade going to be about? And so that's how I work with clients. Just, I want you to think about, what do you want this decade to be about? Is it slowing down with work? Is it ramping up other social activity? Is it travel? Is it now that you're empty nesters, is it reconnecting with your hubby or your partner and finding new and interesting things to do there? It's just like, what do you want that to be? So I always kind of
yeah.
go for that angle.
The decade does seem like a long time for a lot of people, and in particular, like I'm impatient generally. So looking at 10 years ahead, I just go, wow, how can you do that?
Now it's not so much 10 years
Yeah.
ahead, it's because I'm in my decade now,
Right.
and it's just
Yeah.
what did you
What does
know
this 10 years look like?
and I do have a bit of flexibility around that. So things can change. Like you're 5 years into it, and COVID certainly stuffed a lot of that up for all of us, what we thought our decade would be about, and then it got interrupted. But for me, it's more around, there's a theme or an
Yeah.
idea. So it's not like by the end of the next 10 years, what do I want?
Right.
It's just, where do I want to put my attention and energy over the next 10 years?
Yeah. It's a good way to look at the 10 years and look at the next month or look at the next quarter
Yeah. Yeah.
or the
And
next
it
six
all should
months.
link back to that. So if this is how I
Yeah.
want my 10 years to be, what am I doing today? And in fact, my next book, I've just had it greenlit by my publisher, and it's
Phew.
around how we do planning in 2-week increments. And
Yeah.
so if I know I want in 10 years, then my decade to be about this, what am I doing in the next 2 weeks
Yeah.
to help make that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pulling it into the present.
How would you remind someone of being patient in that process? Because if I have a 10-year plan to, set up a successful real estate business, for example, putting myself in there, but I want we want sort of everything now. Have that patience of the long-term game is very hard, and particularly in the younger generation, I would assume.
Well, I don't know, because I don't know. I'm not coaching anyone in that younger
Yeah.
generation, but the work that I mostly do is this idea that 1% better every day, you're going to get way more success. That's the James Clear stuff in his book,
Yeah.
Atomic Habits. So he talks
Yeah.
about the 1% better. I talk about, I talk about trending. As long as we are trending in the right direction, we're getting there. And so if I want to make $1 million this year and I go hard and I go too hard, I'm going to wipe myself out in the first quarter, and then that may not, be helpful. So I talk about managing your adaptive capacity. Have you got sufficient buffer and space in your system to make sure that when things go well, or when things are not going well, or when things go crazy, or when the unexpected happens, that you've got capacity to manage that? So I talk about the 15% rule. And so building in 15% buffers. But in terms of impatience, if I was coaching you, and I feel like I kind of am right now, if I was coaching you, I'd be saying something like, where has it ever happened overnight? There's no such thing as overnight or speedy success. Certainly not sustainable.
No.
So my question to you would be, where have you experienced that? And chances are you're going to say, oh, well, not really. And you built your last business over X amount of years. I'm like, well, okay, so it just takes time.
Takes time. I often look back at the values again and go, okay, well, as long as you're aligning your daily life with your values. Yes. And like you said, improving 1% every day, it doesn't matter. I mean, you'll get there. Things take time.
Absolutely, you get there. So it could be, you could have, not you specifically, but someone who's very impatient and constantly wanting to be taking action could have a dopamine addiction, which is triggered by activity. So if I'm sitting still and waiting, it means I am wasting my time. That means if I'm not constantly doing something, then I'm not being successful. And so depending on the diagnosis, I could say it could just be that you've got to learn to sit in boredom for at least half an hour a day. Right? And just let the world happen, let it emerge. Yeah,
no, I agree. If you're working with an organization around productivity, how do you identify what's important to the business, but then also at the individual level? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's kind of a curious question that I've got.
Yeah. You don't always have exact alignment, but there has to be some kind of overlap, right? Otherwise, people can't stay in organizations if there isn't some. So if you think about the organization's values and its intentions in one circle, then you think about the employee's needs and intentions and values in another. Those Venn diagrams or those circles need to overlap at some level. Now, for some people, they get a massive overlap. It's like absolutely 100% aligned. For others, they drift apart, and for others, it might be a very thin sliver. I think the thinner the sliver, the harder it would be. Yeah. Because it would be hard to show up to work in an environment where you don't have a values match. So it's either you find a way to match and to move your circle closer, or you leave, I guess, because it's very hard to for an individual to influence at an organizational level to get them to shift their values.
I think that just raises the importance of a company or a manager looking at their staff and going, okay, what are the values, and aligning their values with the company's values and putting them in positions that there's a fit. Yeah, and
I think the only risk we have here, so sometimes people misconstrue values as cultural fit, and I'm a big fan of diverse workforces, and I think if you're constantly looking for 100% alignment, you're going to really miss the opportunities of having, different thinkers, of having challenges, of having alternatives. And that's where breakthroughs happen, when you've got people that just say, oh, how about that? So for me, it would be creating a culture of, yes, we want alignment on our vision and potentially our values, how we show up and work together, but we want massive diversity on how we're going to get there, and what are the initiatives we could take, and, what's something different we could do as well.
Yeah. You've got a book there that I want to chat about very soon called ChatGPT, the ChatGPT Revolution, which is an interesting topic. Before we get there, if someone's listening to this and they're feeling overwhelmed with their life, they're just calendar full schedules, what are the top 3 tips you'd give to someone to try and balance that out and remove those 2 bricks to create space for them?
Yeah. So a few things that I talk about. The biggest lever that most people can pull straight away is meetings. Okay. So are you in too many meetings? Could you send someone else? Are you in meetings that should be emails? Really do a deep dive and think, am I just in too many meetings? And I always advise people that to have some kind of gap in your day. So I try to only do meetings between, say, 10 and 4, because I like to determine how my day starts and I like to determine how my day finishes. So it's really hard to get me on a meeting before 10 o'clock in the morning. I made an exception for you on Brisbane time up here today,
Ah,
Leigh, just for you. But you'll never get me in a meeting after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, particularly on a Friday. So I kind of say to people, you decide. And there's a lot of learned helplessness around meetings. We think that we're at the mercy of our clients, our team, our bosses, our whatever, but actually you can determine what meetings you go to and what you don't. There's consequences, of course, but
yeah.
you can determine that. So that's the first thing. The first lever we can pull is meetings.
Yep.
And all of this is red brick thinking, by the way. The second thing we can do is pay attention to the clock in our body, not the one on the wall. So we all have cycles in our day. There's a standard one that about 80% of us have. And then there's always the little variations that, a number of people are different about. And so I'm very good in the mornings. So I protect that time for my most important deep thinking work. Some people come good at around 10 in the morning. Some people are more afternoon. Figure out your best 2 hours in the day and protect that from meetings so that you can then do your real work, your focus work. So that's the second thing. The third thing I'd say is you got to figure out something every day that you're going to do that your future self will thank you for. So a lot of people come to me and say, I'm swamped. I don't know where to start. I've read all your books and I just don't know where to start. And da, da, da. And I'll say it starts this afternoon. So 4 o'clock today, you stop and you think, what could I do in the next half an hour, hour and a half, however long, that would make Monday, we're recording this on a Friday, so I don't know when it'll be released, but let's, for the sake of this, it's Friday today, 4 o'clock today. What could I do today that would make Monday awesome? Now, if it's not a Friday, what could I do the Tuesday afternoon that would make Wednesday morning easier? So it could be anything from, I've got a bunch of meetings in the city. Do I look up the best route to take and where is the nearest car park? And I know that rather than most of us will just jump in the car, head into the city and go, oh, shit, where am I going to park? Right. And so figure that out. I plan my wardrobe. I plan my food. I do as much as I can so that the next day I'm not wasting really valuable time with decision fatigue or choice fatigue or overwhelm. Yeah. So it always starts with the night before or the day before in that evening piece.
Yeah, I like that. Certainly that habit of planning your next day in the afternoon or that evening is phenomenal. And I find it takes away the thought in my brain about what's happening tomorrow. When I've planned it down and I've seen it all, then I'm not stressing about it in the middle of the night.
Right. And you'll do what I call the 3 foundational things. I know you wanted me to give 3 tips, but here's kind of a 4th with 3 parts. You'll sleep better. And so when you sleep better, you make better decisions around food and health. And when you're making better decisions around food and health, you'll start to move better. So when people say to me, how can I be more productive? Often I'll say, well, how's your sleeping? Are you fueling your system appropriately? And are you moving at least 20 minutes every day and getting outside? And so it's never about, here's a fancy way to do to-do lists. It's always about rest, fuel, and movement. And so that setting up my day for tomorrow means I'm not going to wake up at 2 a.m. and sit up and go, oh my God, I've forgotten all this stuff. It's like you'll get a better night's sleep. You'll wake up more refreshed. You've then got the day set up and it gets you off that vicious cycle and starts you on the cycle of, I call it cycle of ease.
Yeah. Love it. Some really important tips there. Thanks for sharing, Donna. And let's go into ChatGPT, the ChatGPT revolution. How's the book? It was launched last September, I think. Was that right?
Yes, but this is the 2nd edition.
Right.
So the first edition was released in July 2023. Right. And then we did a 2nd edition about just over 12 months later. Because as you know, and it's already out of date because so much more has changed. And if I was going to do a 3rd edition, and I don't know if my publisher will want me to, there's so much more that we could talk about in there that isn't in this one. So that's not to say I don't want you to buy it. It's still awesome for your listeners. It's just that that's why we had a 1st edition and then we had a 2nd edition come through. So
it's evolving so rapidly.
It's now been on the shelves. This edition's been on the shelves about 6-7 months.
Right. I think that's the one I saw. So in summary, what are you aiming to achieve with this book?
It's to help people get a start with it. because so many people come to it, and you've got to have a different mindset when you're working with generative AI. So a lot of people approach it with a Google mindset. We're very used to working with Google, and we know when we type something into Google, the kind of answers we expect. And so if you approach, say, ChatGPT or whatever generative AI tool you're using, whether it's Copilot or Claude or any of them, if you approach it with a Google mindset, you're not going to get the right results, right? It's a bit like, thinking when Mercedes first designed the car, however many years ago, hundreds of years ago, they designed the steering apparatus as if it was the reins of a horse, because that's how people were used to steering and controlling vehicles.
And
it wasn't for another 6 years that they figured out the steering wheel was better. And I kind of think of it that way, that if you approach it like Google, you're not going to get as well. You got to think a little differently about it.
So first of all, is AI and things like ChatGPT going to take away our jobs?
It's going to take away the mundane aspects of jobs. So if you've got a really mundane, repetitive job, chances are you'll probably lose your job to AI, because it's just happening all the time now, that things that process, just constantly, pumping out stuff that's repetitive, there's no reason why AI couldn't do that. What I think it does, though, is I think it frees us up to do the more complex stuff. So it's never going to take away thinking. People say, we won't have to think anymore. No, it just frees up space to do better quality thinking. So I heard this really great analogy recently. A mate of mine, a guy called Andrew Hollow, works with a lot of, boards and stuff like that. And he was working with a management group. And they were all talking about AI. It's going to take our jobs. We don't know how to use it. How do we use AI to be more efficient? And the CEO there said, no, here's how we're going to think about this. If you had a brand new employee that was like an intern or just, an assistant for you, what would you get them to do? And so if we start thinking about AI as that additional staff member that we've always needed, what would you get them to do? So marketing might get them to do research. Finance might get them to crunch some numbers and look for patterns in numbers. HR might get them to do data analysis, or write job descriptions and stuff like that. But if we've all now got access to an intern that we can get to do some of the stuff that would just be really helpful.
Yeah. I've certainly found it myself become a lot more efficient because it does a lot of the stuff that I would have spent time on, like a lot of time on. And now I get that time back to think and do other important tasks in my business.
Yeah, so I have it open next to me all the time. And I treat it like, and I've called mine Charlie because, ChatGPT was too hard to say all the time. So Charlie. And so I've now got mine there because it's no different to me having someone sitting next to me and saying, hey, I've got this concept in my head and I need to sum it up with 3 words. I want to try and create a model, or I'd like some alliteration or something like that.
Yeah.
What would you suggest? Give me 10 different ways you would do it.
Yeah.
And before I know it. And so that stops me sitting here agonizing versus, okay, now I've got some ideas which always spark something. It doesn't always give me the perfect answer, but it always sparks something.
Yeah, I love it. What would you say to the skeptics? Because I often hear it when I'm talking to friends, family, etc. No, it's no good. How do you know its information's great? What would you say to those?
Getting better and better all the time. Like I'm old enough to remember when the internet started to become mainstream, and the same things that people are saying about generative AI are the things we used to say about the internet. It's going to take jobs. It's going to dumb us down. You can't trust it. It's not reliable, all that sort of stuff. And it's the same thing happening now. So it's getting better and better. But, I'm not going to run a lesson on it. And anyone that's listening that's interested can go Google it. And there's a gazillion videos on YouTube about how to do this. But I've started to create what's called custom GPTs. And so a custom GPT is trained. I've got PDFs of all my books. Every article I've ever written is sitting in this custom GPT. So now when I talk to it and now when I ask it for stuff, it's using my IP, my thinking, and my voice. Right. So it's not having to, the thing that your cynics are talking about is the hallucination where it makes up stuff. It does make up stuff. But you know what? So do humans. We get stuff wrong all the time. I think we sometimes have an unrealistic view of what we think AI should be, when actually we don't have that same expectation of humans. So lower your expectations would be a bit of advice. And the second thing is get into custom GPTs and train ChatGPT on the information you work with all the time, the websites you go to, the data you refer to all the time, and then it will give you much better results.
Yeah, okay. So how do we get started with ChatGPT? So for a novice listening out there that maybe hasn't jumped on or maybe just dabbled a little bit, what would your advice be for those seeking a bit of time back, I suppose, and starting to use this tool?
Pay attention to any time you're stuck. So if you've just received an email from a client or customer or employee, and you look at that email and you go, I have no idea how to respond to that. I don't know what to say. And then you start typing and then I can't say that. Like, it's a tricky moment. So I would copy. Now, it's up to you about privacy. You'll have to do your own work around that. But what I would do is say, I've received an email that's a bit tricky. Yeah. Here's the gist of it. You can copy and paste if you want. Help me craft a responsive yet assertive and empathetic response. And it will. So anytime you're stuck, ask it.
That's a good idea.
Anytime you're stuck. And it's mostly in the written world. So I don't know how many of your listeners have to write proposals or have to do web copy or social media posts or any of that stuff. Yeah. It's genius. That's where I started. Help me write. Now, just be warned, you got to edit it and you got to, put your voice in it, because it's very obvious now. I go online and I see any post that starts with, in today's fast-paced world, it's crucial, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, oh, that's a ChatGPT post. Yeah. Right?
So definitely don't just copy and paste it into wherever you're putting it. Read it and put your own,
That's it.
Make sure you edit it.
Unless you've created a custom GPT like I have, where it literally is generating content from all my books. Yeah. And all my articles. And so it's usually about 99% good. I probably could just copy and paste it straight in. I don't. I usually tweak it. But even for me, because in my books, I use language like, I reckon, blah, blah, blah. And so now my ChatGPT responses are saying, I reckon in there. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Sounds like me.
That's you. So obviously, I love that idea. Anytime you feel stuck, you could use ChatGPT as like your sidekick assistant to help you brainstorm ideas, write things, whatever it might be.
Right, stuck in this. I talk about this in the book. Your sister-in-law's turning 50, no idea what to get her for a birthday present. She's into 80s country and Western music and Australian soap operas. Yeah. Give me 10 ideas for a gift under $100.
Yeah. Great.
Right?
Yeah.
Easy.
I'm a mad foodie and I love cooking, so I use it all the time for cooking. I got cabbage and mince. What do I make tonight? I want to Asian influence.
Genius for that, right? And I've got a friend who's got in her family, she's celiac. One of her other kids is celiac, and two of her kids are type 1 diabetics. And so trying to organize meal planning around that. So she just goes to it and tells them that this is my family makeup. Can you please give me a 7-day meal plan that would tolerate all of everyone, like it's tolerable for everyone? Yeah. Then generate a shopping list. And then you can say, and put it in the same aisle order as Coles. Right? So then it'll put your shopping list in the aisle order for Coles as well, right? Genius. Now you could copy and paste it into, order it online, I guess, but yeah, genius.
Some great tools. So you talked about, you have to approach it differently than what we would have been used to searching in Google. And I know you talk about in your book about prompting chat correctly. What are your tips there on prompting correctly?
You got to treat it like it's a human. So if you had an intern next to you and you said, go research time management techniques for me, the human would just you come back with a gazillion different options. It would not be at all. So you got to give it context. Yeah. Yep. So I'm interested in time management, specifically around managing my calendar. Yep. Or managing my email. So let's be very specific about that. And then you might give it a little bit more. I'm a real estate I own a real estate business, or I'm I work in retail or whatever. So give it as much context as you can and you'll get a better answer. So it's the old rubbish in, rubbish out. So I always imagine if this was a human next to me, how can I help it give me the best possible answer back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really good point. Treat it like a person.
Yeah.
I mean, I often find myself saying please and thank you. And
you got it, because one day the machines might take over the world and they'll remember us polite ones.
Yeah, you've been very polite to me. Thank you, sir. What else are we seeing? Obviously, the basics of ChatGPT, creating ideas around whatever it is in our workplace, creating articles, copy, and all that sort of thing. We talked about recipes. I use it for itineraries when I'm traveling. All that stuff is fundamentally how I see ChatGPT now. Where is it heading, and what are you now using it for? It's the next level.
Yeah, look, I'll confess I'm a little behind the times with this, but the next big thing that's coming is agents, which is where an agent sits across multiple different, and I'm using this. I don't know that much about this, so if anyone's listening, don't at me, but I'm going to keep it as simple as I can. Sits across multiple different applications applications, and then can do one job. So, for example, it can check the weather where you're traveling to. And if you've booked an outside seat at a restaurant, it will automatically get in touch with the restaurant and say, please change the reservation to an inside seat. So it kind of will do multiple things. It's really smart. And you still have to give it instruction. And we're starting to see.
That's amazing, huh?
Let me just hang on. I've got a device I'll show you. It's called the Rabbit. And it's a device. I got it because I wanted to play around with it. But we're starting to see smart devices. That means that it has all the capability of everything your phone might do except do phone calls. But it uses agents. So it does exactly the thing that I just said. I'm traveling to Sydney. So I just have to say I'm traveling to Sydney and I need a restaurant Friday night, and it does all that work for you. So it's called the Rabbit R1. They're still really in beta testing, and in Australia, certainly it doesn't quite have the functionality it would if it was in the States. But so we're going to start to see AI devices. Already we're seeing AI everywhere. That you can't open an app right now and not see some AI aspect to it.
Yeah.
So even if I think of something like LinkedIn, there's the AI. I'm just looking at Zoom in the background here that has the little AI stars that now can summarize stuff. Like we could get a transcript from this, a summary from this, and then it can even chop the videos up into, usable chunks. So all of that sort of stuff, automation. And something I read about recently is we are going to start to see avatars where, Leigh, you and I could be having these conversations with our avatar rather than the two humans. And so this could change our lives with meetings. I'm not going to the meeting. I'm sending my avatar, and my avatar is trained on how I think and what I do and all my comms in my back end, all the emails I send,
That's a really interesting one.
So it knows how to answer like me.
Yeah.
And then it comes back to me and says, here's what we discussed and here's what I signed you up for.
Yeah.
So it's
phenomenal.
It's not going anywhere. So all your cynics and skeptics that are saying, it's just the latest fad. No. This is
100%.
It's not going anywhere. This is how life is now.
Yeah. I was a late adopter for internet generally, but certainly early for this sort of stuff. And I geek out on it mega in my business. I mean, I use it for my podcast. So I've got an AI system transcripting all our conversations so far, and it'll summarize it and create my blog post and all that sort of stuff at the end.
Yep.
I use Hey Gen video AI, and I'm not quite comfortable with it yet because I sound a little bit robotic. But it means when I'm on the run, I can create a video content piece, me, without actually having to film anything. So, it's amazing.
I've seen that starting to come up on LinkedIn as people are starting to use AI generated videos of themselves.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's still a little bit of a giveaway. Not quite as bad as Max Headroom. You might not be old enough to remember Max Headroom. He was created by Coca-Cola. It was this kind of weird character. So it's not quite as bad as that, but there's some weird facial expressions that it does. So it's still not quite there yet.
No.
But the interesting thing is, from a leadership perspective, humans are still looking for authentic trust and real connection. And so my advice, for what it's worth, at this point in time, is a real video of you having a conversation to the camera is going to be way more, I don't know, connecting and get more traction than at this point in time anyway, than the deep fake version of you.
Yeah. My children, I was in the car with them yesterday, picking up my eldest from dance, and he said, "Oh, Dad, I don't think your job will be around. I heard someone said, because of ChatGPT and AI that real estate agents won't be needed." And I said, "Well, that's not quite true, because it's a service business. It's a people business, and it can do all the other stuff for me, but I can then do more of the people stuff." So I don't think it's going away in that sense.
Not at all. And if you think about decisions like buying real estate, more actually, any decisions are made in the emotion centers of the brain.
Right.
And so it's only humans that can connect at that emotional level. Lots of people are experimenting with it and trying to get AI to do that. But it's just, at this point in time, I reckon it's a long way off before we would feel we have be able to do that emotional connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's so important, particularly in, buying real estate.
Well, any service business, people still want that connection. It's that's a fundamental value to us, is connection. So I don't think we'll ever lose that part of it. Very interesting conversation. I love this idea of agents as well. That's pretty much like having your own robot. It's not in robot form, and it'll come when we have robots. And I think Elon Musk said, or someone said, that in 10 years' time we'll all have multiple robots in our houses.
Do you remember? There's always those things. When the Beatles came out, they said, "Oh yeah, guitar bands aren't popular anymore," and of course the Beatles. And IBM, I think it was IBM, said to Microsoft, "No," because Microsoft had a vision that there'll be a computer on every person's desk. Yeah. And IBM went, "Nah, there's probably a market for maybe 10." Right. And so I think that level of prediction is bang on.
Yeah, me too.
That it will not be long before we have someone, a robot, either at work or in our homes helping us with stuff.
Yeah. Well, that agents thing is just a good start to it.
That's it.
So thank you so much, Donna McGeorge, coming on the podcast today. You've got a website, and correct me if I'm wrong, DonnaMcGeorge.com.
Correct.
I'll put that in the link in the show notes, everyone listening out there. And your newest book, second edition, the ChatGPT Revolution. Get curious, get productive, and get creative with AI. Love the conversation. Thank you so much for sharing, and hope you did as well.
Yeah, I did. It was awesome. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Any final words, or you want to direct anyone anywhere?
Oh, no, not really. Just I think my final word is always do things your future self will thank you for, because it's, and getting into AI, having a crack at it and starting to learn it, your future self will definitely thank you for that.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to use that. Thank you so much, Donna. Guys, check it out at thehiddenwhy.com. Live more fully, have more meaning, find more joy. We'll speak soon.